Hello and welcome. Well, this is a rather exciting interview that's about to happen. It's one I've been looking forward to enormously. It's with Professor Carlos Eire, who is a professor of history at Yale, and it's about his book, They Flew. This is a story of how an academic at Yale risked his whole reputation because the evidence that he came across for the supernatural in the Catholic faith was overwhelmingly well documented. There are three categories of people in the world: believing Catholics, atheists and Protestants. The atheists and the Protestants say this isn't possible, this is hagiography at best, deception at worst, propaganda if you like. One of the reasons why people become Catholics is because they discover that the claims for the miraculous are true. In my case, it was the Eucharistic miracles, the apparitions of Our Lady, and the holiness of the saints and the miracles that follow. What you're about to hear is a discussion about three particular saints, two of them, one of them well known, Teresa of Avila, and then two less well known, St. Joseph of Cupertino and St. Maria Agreda. I hope that as you listen, you'll see that not only are we talking about Carlos's book, which is just the most incredible read, but we're talking about something also much more significant, what we call in the end a paradigm shift in the relationship between the natural and the supernatural, between the physical and the spiritual, between faith, doubt and disbelief. And I think you'll be surprised at what comes next. So let me not take up any more of your time and attention, but introduce you to Carlos Eire, who's the most extraordinary Catholic and historian. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to have a conversation with him. Carlos, thank you so much for joining me again. We're about to do something that I'm almost shivering with excitement over. I feel like a child on Christmas Eve about to open a really exciting present. It's wrapped in the packaging of a book you wrote called They Flew. And I have to say, I find levitation deeply uncomfortable. I've got an instinct in me that says this is the kind of stuff of snake charmers from India, and I want nothing at all to do with it. So I was reassured by the subtitle of your book, which was The History of the Impossible. And at that point, I was as grabbed as I was put off. And I thought, I have to read A History of the Impossible, particularly as I read you on Reformation. And I couldn't understand how a mainstream academic, first-rate Yale historian who'd written this amazing book on such an important subject would find himself writing about miracles in the way you did. And then I read your introduction, and perhaps you could tell us about how you moved from being, if you like, a historical bystander to being captivated by the authenticity of the accounts you were dealing with as a research historian.
Yes. Well, the large background picture is that all of my academic work has been driven by a very personal interest in how it is that the spiritual and material realms have related to each other throughout history, and how that relationship has been interpreted. That is, everything I have written has been in one way or another about this. But I was very young, very early in my career. In the summer of 1983, I was in Avila in Spain, and I went for a tour of St. Teresa's first convent of the Incarnation. And the young guide who was taking us through the convent, was showing us things in a very matter-of-fact way. Here's the kitchen where Teresa cooked. Here's the staircase where she tumbled down and broke her arm. Here's the refectory where they ate, so on and so forth. Then we get to one spot in this room that's known as the locutorio, which is where these enclosed nuns would talk to visitors through a grill, much like a prisoner. And she points to the grill and says, and here's the spot where St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross levitated together for the first time. It was no different from the staircase or the pots and pans or anything. It was just a fact. the way she presented it was a fact. And something went off in my brain. It's not like I heard a pop or anything like this, but something in my brain it was not a mystical experience. It was not a religious experience. It was a cognitive firestorm, is what I call it in my book. Why is this a fact for this woman? I have been trained not to treat events such as this as facts. As a matter of fact, no pun intended, as a matter of fact, I knew I could be severely punished career-wise if I took it to be a fact. And that was, 40 years, now 42 years ago. And so the project stewed in my brain for a long time. I started working on it in bits and pieces. And anytime I was in Spain, I would go to an archive and look up materials on this. Eventually I got old enough, and that's, I think, a very honest answer. I got old enough and established enough as a scholar to put aside my functionalist training, because this attitude towards the miraculous that I was putting aside does have a name in it. It's called functionalism. We historians and all scholars have been told now for generations that the only thing we can do with the miraculous, no matter where the miraculous is, whatever culture, is not to ask the question, well, did this really happen? No.
I think Freud, in my own background, which involved teaching a little bit of psychology at university, and one of the things I presided over in my time was a shift of culture from being overshadowed by Freud to being overshadowed by Jung. That was always going to happen. Each brought different strengths and weaknesses. The problem with the Freudian overshadowing was that all of us were paralyzed by the fear that the supernatural or an experience of the supernatural might be a sign that we were going mad.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we hearing voices, we couldn't afford it. And in the religious sphere, that was doubled down on as a Protestant by the fact that I'd read endless Catholic hagiographies. Hagiography, it's a genre, and it's quite an exciting genre, and you have to learn what the code is. But from a non-Catholic point of view, everything miraculous was a hagiography. Everything was a self-serving propaganda experiment to shore up the Catholic Church. And so I from the outside, I had to overcome two difficulties: the fear of Freud and the fear of hagiography. And one of the things I was so excited about in your book was that, refuting functionalism, you decided to present the evidence. Value, is anything value-free? But value-free, at least from these two frightening ideas that made access to the supernatural impossible from where I had been.
Yes, and the fact is, again, no pun intended, the fact is that there are anomalous phenomena all throughout history. So as a historian, I had to decide, how do I approach these phenomena in an empirical way? And it dawned on me not early on, actually, about the last third of my project, when I started to actually write something down rather than just taking notes. It occurred to me that everything rests on evidence, and historians have criteria for weighing evidence. And here was one body of evidence in Western history, in Christian history, that was considered totally useless, invalid. And I tried to think if there was any other category of evidence that historians dismissed outright without looking into the evidence itself. So that's what I started to do. And I was surprised. I think that what what made my project possible is the fact that I was working in 16th and 17th century events, because the way that the evidence for these miracles was collected beginning in the 16th century was qualitatively different from the way that evidence had been collected previously throughout the Middle Ages. So, as I say in the book, and I say in the conclusion, I think the best way to approach these things is to keep an open mind, to not dismiss the evidence. It's not the same kind of proof that you get after a battle during a war, or the kind of evidence you get when in court somebody's committed a crime and they're searching for the weapon or the fingerprints. No, we don't have that kind of evidence, but we do have evidence collected during beatification and canonization inquests, in which eyewitnesses had to fill out questionnaires, and the questionnaires contained a section on miracles, and they had to swear that they were telling the truth. And as in a court of law to this day in any civilized nation, right, witnesses testify and they swear, I'm telling the truth. But the penalty in a civil court of law in our own day is a fine, or maybe a little bit of time behind bars for lying. The penalty in this case is hell. And all of these witnesses, or 90-some% of them, are deeply religious people who believed in hell. Or, because we're dealing with Catholics, maybe a very, very long stint in purgatory after they confessed this. So
there's a point in your book when you say there was a minimum number. I think if I remember this rightly, you said, well, I'm used to dealing with sort of independent pieces of evidence, but if I find, was it 6 or 7 independent testimonies that something happened, I'm past number 6, past number 7, whatever the number was, that's the point where I treat this as reliably triangulated, a phenomenon that I can begin to resist on. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, I mean that's precisely it. And it's not a matter of quantification or having a mathematical equation, but just the weight of the evidence. And the question that should be asked is, can these many people be lying under these circumstances? So, I'm reminded of something in the reverse, a book by Carlo Ginzburg, The Cheese and the Worms, which deals with an Italian miller who was processed by the Inquisition because he makes outrageous statements all the time about everything regarding religion. And Ginsburg's argument is that, if you have this one miller, you probably, with ideas like this, there must have been at least 2 people with ideas like this. And then he kind of turns it into a mathematical quantum leap. And his name was Menocchio. Uno Menocchio, due Menocchi, mille Menocchio. 1 Menocchio, 2 Menocchios, 1,000 Menocchios. So there's much that's hidden underground from our point of view, because we have been culturally indoctrinated to dismiss this evidence. So it's literally invisible.
That's why I loved your book so much, because I recognize that I've been culturally indoctrinated, and I was struggling against it to try and find some kind of equilibrium. And then along you come with your book and say, well, I'm a historian, and here's the evidence. I'm going to present you with the evidence. Now you can make up your own mind. And the evidence is extraordinary. I mean, it's really, it almost makes one wants to weep, really. I mean, I will come to him in a moment, but my favorite part of the whole book is when St. Joseph Cupertino is celebrating Mass and levitating. I don't like it, but there he is above the altar, and he can't reproduce the fraction because he later explains there are hard-hearted heretics in the church, and we discover that actually one of the leading German dukes has heard about him in Assisi and has snuck in with his retinue to watch, and somehow 10 feet or whatever it is above the altar, trying to break the Eucharistic bread. He says he can't, and it's because there are hard-hearted people there. I mean, the whole thing is so bizarre in our cultural terms. It's impossible to believe. If it wasn't for the fact that the Duke is a very reliable intellectual who actually has chosen to employ Leibniz, as all people, as his court philosopher, and that it, in Assisi the whole thing has been observed by countless people, and the real problem is not that they're trying to fake it, but that they end up by imprisoning him and hiding him away because he's too much of an embarrassment. And there's this wonderful, we'll talk about these three figures I'm hoping we'll cover, Teresa, Maria Agreda, and St. Cupertino. The extent to which they suffer from the publicity or benefit from it changes in each context. In other words, there's no simple hagiographical pattern.
Right.
Anyway, it's the most incredible book. Shall we go to Teresa, because people know about Teresa, and very hard to believe this tough administrator who crosses a river in a cart. It gets tipped into the water, lies on her back, and says, "Lord, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you've got so few of them." And then moves on to with the energy, intelligence, and courage to single-handedly renew her order and monasticism in Spain. She's the most phenomenal woman, and we catch her levitating with St. John of the Cross. So tell us about this. How does this happen?
Well, the first thing to say is that she was not too happy about levitating. And she begged God,
put it down.
Stop doing this to me. Stop doing this to me. And she, since she was the superior at this point when she was levitating, she ordered her fellow sisters to, next time you see me going up, try to hold me down or pull me down.
Yes.
And why? But why would she be so upset? And it was because this called attention to her. And there are two things going on simultaneously. For monastics, humility is the chief virtue. And this would make her seem special. And people might start seeing her as special. But it's also 16th century, and the Inquisition is very, very active in Spain. And actually, the Inquisition, one of its jobs was to investigate anyone who had these mystical ecstasies, because all of her levitations occurred during mystical ecstasies there, and we can talk about this later. They are a byproduct of mystical experience in which the levitator it becomes very, very close to God, and their body stiffens. They go into basically a cataleptic state in which their body becomes very rigid and they don't respond to any sensory stimuli. So she is afraid that the Inquisition will find her guilty of being in league with the devil. And that's the bottom line, because she had already early on in her experience with prayer, when she began to have visions of Christ, several confessors had told her that was not Christ that she was seeing, that it was the devil. So she knew that she was already, there were clerics that suspected her.
She was in trouble, yeah.
But there's one event that she describes in her own autobiography, when one confessor had told her, next time you see Christ, make an obscene gesture, give him the fig, which is an old monastic tradition. I just read one from a much earlier century where a monk gets exactly the same advice. Anyway, so Jesus shows up and she gives him the fig, and what he says to her is, thank you. Thank you for obeying your confessor. But now go and tell him I'm not the devil. And she finally got a younger confessor who encouraged her and said, yeah, no, these are not demonic visions. You're actually seeing Christ. So we're already dealing with somebody who, communes with the supernatural in the most unusual way.
I hope we're going to talk about obedience. I'm not quite sure where we'll fit it in, but because, as you quite rightly say in the book, the almost the only cure to levitation was prayers offered in obedience to a superior. But I remember the first time I came across this, as I was looking at the Catholic faith, was when I was looking at Garabandal and the apparitions of Our Lady. Mm-hmm. And very surprised indeed that when the bishop told the children they were no longer allowed to come and meet Our Lady in the church, in the parish church, and they arrived at the church and they said to Our Lady, well, surely you're more important than the bishop. Surely we can go on, we can pull rank with you. And she said, no, you must exercise obedience to the bishop. And we don't go and do this. And so, to a casual observer who's not used to the concept of the spiritual currency of obedience, this is a bit of a surprise. But all the way through these phenomena that you describe, the issue of ecclesial obedience takes center stage. It's a very high currency in terms of spiritual engagement.
Definitely. And that's with the cases that are proven to be legitimate in the minds of the church. In the cases that are discovered to be frauds, because that's another, the flip side of the coin is that for every legitimate levitator, there are several false ones who end up being discovered and exposed as frauds. In the case of Teresa, she's investigated, and she actually, begs God, please stop doing this to me, and says in her autobiography that sometime around the year 1562 or so, they had stopped. But they returned later. And we learn this not only from one of her letters where she says to someone, it started happening again, but that levitation with St. John of the Cross took place in the early 1570s when he was confessor at the convent. So we know they returned. She is the one levitator who describes from a first-person perspective her levitations in the greatest detail. And she had her own way of explaining why this happened. But the description is that she felt a great force that was irresistible coming up from beneath her, dragging her up, pushing her up. And it was an irresistible force. And if you resisted it, it actually hurt your body. Your body would feel pain resisting it. Her own explanation for it is, of course, not scientific. But she said that the soul is pulled upwards to God in ecstasy so strongly and so quickly that the body has to follow. So as the soul is engaging in basically, as she said, another point in her autobiography, that these experiences, it's like conversing with God as you would converse with a close friend. When this happens interiorly, spiritually in the soul, the body is affected.
And this is so important, isn't it? As we were talking about in our earlier conversation, the influence of Neoplatonism, amongst other approaches, wanted to separate the soul and the body, and our cultural and scientific and moral problems now, we think we trace back to this terrible separation between matter and spirit. And one of the things that your book does is it shows there is this within the Catholic experience, within Catholic theology and spirituality, there is the most profound integration between body and spirit, and the stigmata show this, levitation show this. Bilocation is going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to talking about that. But if there is one simple change of perspective that this whole phenomenon produces in one, is I've got to rethink the relationship between my soul and my body.
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that even in our own day and age, the Catholic Church has de-emphasized, and especially since the Second Vatican Council, there has been a definite de-emphasis on this aspect of mysticism, while at the same time there has been a growing interest, especially among lay Catholics, in studying spirituality and mysticism. So there's something of a slight conundrum there. This de-emphasis. Go ahead.
Teresa of Avila is then investigated by the Inquisition, and I think this is important, and it needs remembering, because there are going to be a lot of people who come quite rightly skeptical. Skepticism is the right beginning approach, because it's a way of trying to discern truth from falsehood. What else should we do? We're not here to be gullible. But as you quite rightly say, not very many people know much, in fact, about the Inquisition, which was a very complex theological and political organism, in fact. And most of the things that people think they know about him are wrong. But nonetheless, it was much worse being investigated by the Inland Revenue than having the IRS come and knock on your door. So it was a serious disincentive to invent or attention seek at all.
Oh yes, and the Inquisition had a term for that, and it's a form of classifying a case. You see it in the Inquisition registers. They called it inventing the sacred. And they went after people who invented the sacred, because there were many who were doing this, and they're ferreted out because the evidence comes to their attention. The Inquisition is very, very thorough. The documents are so thorough. It is actually actually looking at Inquisition documents is as close as I have ever come to feeling like I was in a time machine, because of the amount of details that are provided about the people that are being investigated. And in the case of Teresa, I mean, skepticism is part of the Catholic tradition. And many people don't know this, of course, because it's tucked away, hidden in evidence that you have to look hard to find it. But she kept being denounced to the Inquisition throughout the rest of her life. And even after she died, she was being denounced to the Inquisition, especially by Dominicans, members of the Dominican order. It wasn't there was one Dominican who kept denouncing her even while she was being processed for beatification and canonization. And the Inquisition kept receiving these accusations. And by that point, though, what the Inquisition did with those accusations, I'm sure, was just simply to file them away. They were so thorough, they filed them away. And we have them. And the only way the accusations ceased is that she was canonized as a saint by the church. So then that Dominican had to shut up.
I'm not quite sure how to time manage this, because I could do this for hours. Can I take you to Bilocation and Maria Agreda, but by way of Padre Pio? Again, one of my entrances in to Catholicism was through Eucharistic miracles, Our Lady's apparitions, and Padre Pio. And the reason I liked Padre Pio was the same reason I started my apparitions search at Garabandal. I wanted something contemporary. I wanted something where I could say I'm not the victim of hagiography or cultural dissonance. If in 1965 someone says this man was both in a monastery in Italy and in a confessional in Rome, then if everything else looks sane and reliable, I don't have to deal with cultural filtration. I can just, strip in Occam's razor sense. I can strip away as much as possible to get to things that need assessing. And so, I mean, I love Padre Pio because he's immensely lovable, but I particularly love the fact that these phenomena took place during my lifetime when I was about, 10 or 14. That's what to me, that I find that immensely exciting. There's a great deal of evidence from contemporary eyewitnesses about Padre Pio's location, and I say that really just as an introduction to Maria Agreda, because the thing is, it's so unheard of. It's so unusual. It's so the scale of what we're about to talk about is so mind blowing that if people didn't think we had approached it sensibly, they would imagine we were gullible or determined on some form of unjustified propaganda. But can you explain the phenomenon of bilocation and Maria Agreda and the tribes in South America and Mexico?
Maria de Agreda was a Franciscan conceptionist, immaculate nun, a branch of the Franciscan order, and lived in a very remote region of northeast Spain, almost in the border with Aragon. Agreda is in the middle of nowhere, literally, and a very, very small town to this day. But this Franciscan nun started having ecstasies very early in life, and she would levitate during her ecstasies, but also claimed that while she was in ecstasy there, in a cataleptic state, because the nuns actually poked her with pins and held candles by her eyes to make sure that, and flies would land in her eyes and she wouldn't bat an eyelash. She was just totally cataleptic. That during these cataleptic mystical ecstasies, she found herself in present-day Texas and New Mexico in North America, evangelizing the Humano people. And when asked how many times this had happened, she estimated about 500 times. We're not talking about this person flying through the air across the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. No. This is an instantaneous event where she's still in Agreda and her sisters are poking her with pins, and she is evangelizing the Humano people. And later, during the investigation, when asked, and actually this shows, prejudices of the 16th century. How could you communicate with these people? They don't even have a language. All they do is grunt. How could you communicate with them? And she said, I don't know, but we understood each other. It's sort of like in the Acts of the Apostles after Pentecost, the apostles speak in, I assume, Aramaic, and everybody heard them in their own language. So this happened.
Can I just stop you? Just a 10-second intermission. We do have an episode of Bilocation in the early church in AD 60, I think, in Spain again.
Yes.
Our Lady. Can you just briefly? Because I probably might help. The utter skeptics saying, "What are these two men talking about?" We do have a very early church reference to this that a lot of people don't make any sense of.
Well, in Zaragoza, Spain, there's a shrine to Our Lady of the Pillar, Nuestra Señora del Pilar, and it's a spot where, according to, historians would say legend.
Right.
Maria de Agreda says this is a fact, this happened. The Apostle James was evangelizing in Spain and having a very hard time, being persecuted. And Our Lady appeared, James, on top of a pillar in what is now Zaragoza, Spain, to comfort him. So, and left behind an image of herself. So there is that bilocation in early church history. And also in the New Testament, there's the case of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. Uh, Philip just disappears. That's not exactly a bilocation, but he's there one moment and he's gone the next. So there are, it's a very unusual miracle. It doesn't happen very often, and it's even more difficult to document than levitation, because you need eyewitnesses in place A and place B.
And ideally a telephone between them or satellite link or something.
And then I only know of one case of a levitation, and I forget the saint's name, that occurred basically across two streets. So people were running back and forth.
Wow.
Right? So that's the only case I know. But it was so early, so medieval, the evidence being what it is, I decided not to even put it into my book. But in the case of Maria de Agreda, it took years for the information to cross oceans and for the Franciscan order itself to get involved in the investigation. And she was investigated by the Inquisition as well. But the story goes something like this. The Humanos lived, I forget how many 100 miles away from the nearest Franciscan mission. But they came once a year to this mission to trade. And they started asking for baptism one year. And every other year, when the next year they'd return, please baptize us. And the missionaries would say, but we haven't instructed you yet. We can't baptize you. And they said, well, this lady has been telling us everything. We know all about it. We want to be baptized. And, the story gets more complicated in terms of details after that. But eventually, her bilocations were deemed to be a legitimate fact. The Humanos were baptized. And to this day, in the southwestern United States, the legend of the Lady in Blue, because her Franciscan habit had a grayish, bluish scapular on it, the Lady in Blue, they have just erected a very lovely and very large statue to the Lady in Blue in San Angelo, Texas, just a few years ago. She's that much of a legend there. Most people don't know about Maria de Agreda. But Maria de Agreda was an exceptional mystic who not only levitated and bilocated, but also had constant visions of the Virgin Mary. And the Virgin Mary dictated her autobiography to Sor Maria de Agreda. And she wrote it down. It's over 1 million words long. It spans several volumes. And this, too, is part of her legacy. And I actually had a whole chapter on the text of the Mystical City of God. It's the name. But I left it out of the book because it's too distracting. It's just a completely different type of miracle. But the fact is...
Does it in any way chime with either the Proto-Evangelium of St. James and...
Yes. Definitely.
Does it?
Oh, she definitely read the Proto-Evangelium.
Right.
But she had other revelations that are not in any of this the so-called apocryphal literature from the early church.
So cool. Can we just emphasize, because I mean, maybe you did and I didn't attend to it properly, but in terms of the attempts to prove this actually happened or test or prove it didn't happen, which is there was an enormous amount of traffic across the Atlantic over years as the tribe made claims, and then they asked Maria Agreda herself, and then they put all these two things together, and in the end the conclusion was they fitted. It really,
yes.
So it looked like it happened.
Yes, and bilocation. Readers of my book have some readers have focused in on this, and I received a very surprising email last year from a reader who was delighted to see that Maria de Agreda was able to speak to the humanos, and they were able to speak to her. But here comes the shocking part. The man says to me in the email, I worked for the CIA for over 20 years, doing remote viewing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and both the CIA and the KGB had these remote viewing projects where they thought that someone with special abilities could see what the other side was doing. Here in the United States, it was called Project Stargate. But he went on to say, often when I was remote viewing, I would find myself on the other side. And I and the person on the other side could communicate despite the fact that we didn't speak the same language. And then he said, and I can put you in touch with others who have had the same experience.
Wow.
So how to take that seriously? Well, that's a different sort of evidence, different sort of it. But there's also the case, not very well known.
Can I just say that just for the sake of intellectual neatness, what this raises for us is a spectrum with poles at the other end of, if you like, naturalistic phenomena that seem to take place because there are stranger things under heaven and earth and sanctified phenomena. And if we were going to have this conversation in a different context, I'd want to tease out that spectrum.
Yes. And those things have to be separated, and it leads to all sorts of sticky questions.
Right, absolutely.
What is natural?
I don't like those questions. I'd like to stay in the warm bath of the Catholic faith for the moment.
Yes.
Anyway, but I just in case there are well-informed people who are listening to us, right. I think they ought to know that we're aware of that spectrum, and we know about it.
But in the Catholic end of the spectrum, there's a nun, Yvonne Aimée de Beauvais, also known as Yvonne Aimée de Malestroit, where her convent was, an Augustinian nun, born in 1901, died in 1951. There are over 800 testimonies of her bilocations.
Good gracious.
Most of which occurred during the Nazi occupation of France, and most of which involved appearing to people in prisons and concentration camps. And at the end of the war, she was decorated, given the 3 highest honor medals that any French person could get, pinned on her by Charles de Gaulle. And there's film of Charles de Gaulle pinning these medals on her because, in addition to these bilocations, she and her nuns helped downed Allied pilots, Jews, and resistance fighters to escape from France by dressing them as nuns. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. But all the literature is in French. It has never been translated into any other vernacular. So
no, this sounds like a job for my retirement. Seriously, no one's translated it.
Absolutely. And her confessor has written a 6-volume hagiography of Yvonne Aimée.
Oh, somebody out there needs to translate this into English for us.
Well, actually, I started using ChatGPT to translate there's one book that focuses just on her bilocations. I mean, I can read French perfectly and I could translate it, but it would take me forever because translation is time consuming. But I'm trying it out to see how accurate a translation I can get to maybe speed it up, because
this is very exciting. May you live forever.
Oh gosh, yes, this is it. At my age, long-term projects like They Flew, which took me 40 years from start to finish. That's it's no longer possible.
Well, quite. It's like building a medieval cathedral taking 300 years. Let's go to St. Joseph Cupertino. Well, I don't want to. I mean, any more interjections like that one? Please throw them in. It's too exciting not to do it. But
I thought since you brought up Padre Pio, I thought it was important to note that he's not the only 20th century Catholic who's reported to have bilocated. So,
And I remember now it passed across my horizon, and I went, oh my, and then time and speed, and I didn't come back to it. So thank you so much. I'll try. My French isn't bad. I'll try and
well,
get back to that. But
I'll send you the bibliography, basically.
yes, please. Thank you very much. Yes. Let's go. My dear and most beloved St. Joseph of Cupertino. Can you introduce us to him?
Yes, St. Joseph of Cupertino was an anomalous human being because from early on in life, he was ridiculed basically as the village idiot. And in his nickname in Cupertino, other people called him Boca Aperta, which means open mouth.
Yeah.
A simpleton who had a deeply spiritual life from very early on and desperately wanted to join the Franciscans and tried twice, and he was so inept at everything that he got tossed out. But finally he managed to join the Franciscans, and wow, when he did, he would frequently go into ecstasies of the sort described previously, a cataleptic kind of ecstasy. But he would also rise above the ground, and perhaps by all the eyewitness descriptions, more frequently and sometimes higher than other levitators in Catholic history. And he too was taken to the Inquisition in Naples, investigated by because the Cupertinos in southern Italy, and it was under Spanish rule at the time. They took him to Naples. He was investigated there. And the levitations were deemed legitimate, especially because some of the investigators saw him levitate. But they decided these are divinely caused levitations, not demonic levitations. And from Naples, he went up to Rome. He saw the Pope, Urban VIII, levitated over the Pope's head. And Urban supposedly said, if I outlive this man, I will testify at his canonization inquest that I saw him above my head. Oh, and the title, They Flew, really, I wanted to have the title be He Flew, because Joseph is the only one of the levitators I have investigated who actually would move from, point A to point B.
Yes. And there's a wonderful moment, isn't it, when the Pope the Pope who says, "Well, okay, get him down now," and he won't, or he can't come down until they go and fetch his superior. That's and right. Say, yes. Well, you tell the story. You know it better.
Well, sometimes his ecstasies would end abruptly when his superior ordered him to come down, but no one else who said come down had any effect on him. And Joseph, there's so much detail. The levitations are frequent. When he is in his cataleptic state, it's not just his body that becomes rigid, his clothing becomes rigid. And as he moves through the air, the folds, the creases in his habit don't change. Sometimes even when he's upside down, the habit does not slide down, past his head down to the ground. No. So it's like he's encased in some kind of force field, for lack of a better term. But the incident you related before about the Lutheran prince, John Frederick of Saxony, of all places, Saxony. I don't know what he's doing in Italy. He's doing some early version of the Grand Tour and ends up in a CC. And it's not just that Joseph is unable to break the host during consecration when John Frederick is in the church. It's that John Frederick sees him up in the air and converts to Catholicism. This is the major Lutheran prince who converts to Catholicism because he sees Joseph flying. Not flying, but levitating. No, he did see him traverse space. But as you also said, there's a problem with this. By this time, people are flocking to Assisi to see Joseph. Very, very important people throughout Europe write for permission to go see him. Queens, dukes, all sorts of nobility. And they're not given permission. He's too much of a distraction. And some critics have said that he was eclipsing St. Francis himself. So they move him from Assisi, and for the remainder of his life, they keep removing him to ever more remote locations. And
he becomes institutionalized. I mean, he's locked away almost like a madman, and they can't cope with him being exposed to the public. It's too difficult for them.
One of these remote locations where they send him, the people actually remove roof tiles in the church so they can peek down and see him. So he ends up spending the last decade of his life as a prisoner in solitary confinement. A two-room suite, one which was a little chapel, and the other his bedroom. And once a week he could eat with his brothers, but the rest of the time he was by himself. And at this very same time, it's the publicity's still there, the buzz about the saint in his own lifetime. But most people don't know where he is because the remote location is way, way, way too remote for most people to know. And it's very, very interesting that the Pope who ends up canonizing him decades later his name is Prospero Lambertini, who became Pope. Prospero Lambertini wrote the book on canonization as still used by the Catholic Church. Prospero Lambertini's book is still used, and Prospero Lambertini had served as the devil's advocate before he became Pope, because that position had been created earlier. Here we go again with doubt, right? Prospero Lambertini is the Pope who, in rewriting the canonization procedures, placed a greater emphasis on heroic virtue than on miracles. Of course, nearly everyone, even non-Catholics, know that miracles are needed to be declared a saint. But Prospero Lambertini ends up canonizing Joseph. And ever since, obviously, saint patron saint of anyone who flies, among other things, including exam takers. Because the way he was finally ordained as a priest is that a miracle occurred in his exam, which was that the bishop ran out of time questioning the seminarians, and just simply said about the batch he had not had time to examine. That's fine. Let it pass.
Let me ask you about the book itself, because I was just so, when I came to the book, as I say, having encountered you as an international historian of some balanced repute, first of all, I couldn't believe it, and then I read it and couldn't believe it some more. But it does strike me, joking and laughter aside, that as a phenomenon, what you've done in this book is really very significant, because it sets out to bridge the gap between credulity and faith and incredulity. It brings up to date, using all the proper techniques of a historian researcher, the right method, the right and reliable method, and wonderfully it it challenges in a flagrant way the intellectual assumptions of our culture. What kind of response have you had to your writing it? Do people say, "Oh well, this is Carlos's pet project. It's a weird part of his faith. This is him. What for other people is golf is for Carlos is levitation." How or has there been any serious intellectual impact from the fact that you would write this and it would stand up to scrutiny?
Well, there have been, so far, more positive than negative reviews, including one review from an MIT professor who praised the book for its content, as well as you say, its attempt to shift the paradigm. But there have been two very, very negative reviews.
I'm not surprised.
One in the Times Literary Supplement, the other in the New York Review of Books. But the one in the New York Review of Books, begins with the following sentence: "This is a deeply unserious book."
Oh my word!
And the review on the Times Literary Supplement basically accuses me of being a liar. Because I know that all these testimonies are false, and that all these people are lying, and I'm trying to fool people into thinking that these liars are not liars.
As a Catholic apologist, that's awful. Did that hurt you very much, or
no?
Was it more like water of duck's back? Good.
I knew this would be coming. I knew it's a natural reaction that people might have who are dogmatic materialists. Of course,
well, it's the only way of resisting the paradigm shift is to denigrate you, and that it's the ultimate ad hominem thing, isn't it? I'm not dealing with the material appealing. Yeah.
And the review in the Times Literary Supplement, the guy actually did his research. He dug deeply into my history, the history of my scholarship, and also seemed to think that it was relevant that as a child I lived in Latin America. So he brought up my ethnicity as further proof of the fact that I'm not really an intellectual.
He must have been left-wing to do that. No right-winger would dare do it. It has to be a left-wing critic.
Well, he thought it was relevant. I'm giving over to magical realism.
That's just terrible. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
That's appalling.
Well, at a certain level, this happens routinely, that when something is shocking and it in someone's mind it needs to be refuted, the attack goes ad hominem.
Yeah, always to all of us. That's true.
So
I've given various talks around the country. I'm not in huge demand, but occasionally people pay for a rail ticket, and on these occasions I wave your book around and say, this is one of the most exciting Catholic apologetics that you could come across, because it does everything you would ask of a text like this. I mean, you didn't set out to do it as a Catholic apologist. You just set out as a historian to tell the truth about history, and the truth that it tells is exciting and mind-boggling to a degree that one can't anticipate. I think I really, I just read it with such delight. I do hope it gets a wider press, because it seems to me that just at this point, when, as you and I discussed in our earlier conversation, we're dealing with a civilizational crisis that can't distinguish between how and why and marry them together, between left brain and right brain, between measurement and meaning. It's precisely a book like that says, but look, here in the Catholic faith, here in Christianity, contradiction becomes benign paradox. It becomes salvation, not madness. And lots of people write books to try and persuade others of their worldview, but all you have done is to say, let me teach you a little bit of history you may not know about.
But the evidence I present, obviously the two very negative reviews that didn't accept the evidence as convincing, because they are dismissed the evidence.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but in a sense, one must expect this both from materialists, and I'm afraid I didn't mean this rudely, but also from Protestants. I mean, it simply tells them that all the things they've relied on and they've believed in deeply for the whole of their lives are really mistaken. It takes a person of immense caliber to face that and to begin to process the possibility of it.
But so far, I have had a good deal of support and affirmation from within the scholarly community. Just this past January, an entire panel was devoted to my book at the annual meeting of the American Society of Church History.
Brilliant.
And then in the forthcoming issue of the journal Church History, there will be a printed version of the discussion the panel had, and everyone in the panel, all of them were Protestants.
Wow.
And they responded very, very favorably.
Well, that just shows how wrong I was in what I said a few moments ago.
Well, no, but actually, among evangelical Protestants here in the United States, there's a greater openness than there used to be towards these Catholic phenomena and Catholicism in general, because, I think all Christians feel under attack here in the United States. We are under attack. And I think there has been a realization here that perhaps, is very American. We're all in the same boat.
Absolutely.
Right? So let's get closer to people.
I think too there is I'm going back in 1975. I was a law student, imagining I was going to become a lawyer, and I had an evangelical conversion experience from an evangelist in a cathedral, and at the end of it, after being invited to go forward and declare my faith in Jesus, which I did on the basis I would convert for periods of 48 hours only. And I would review it after 48 hours to see if the evidence still held up. I said to Jesus, you're not coming that easily. This is going to be a struggle. But I remember saying to the Lord, well, okay, I've been in a nominal Church of England, Anglican. Do I get to change my denomination? Because if I do, I'd like to be either Catholic or Pentecostal. Because even in 1975, I had a sense that these were two communities that had a reputation for dealing with the spiritual more seriously than the one I'd grown up in, which had, if anything, tamed it out of existence. So I think this phenomenon that's come to birth, at least in the last 50 or 60 years, is that that Christian mindset that's willing to stand out against the cultural norms of dividing matter and spirit, dividing faith and reality. They're the ones that are closest to real Christianity and have therefore better traction. So I think that there ought to be closer affiliation between certainly evangelical Pentecostalism and Catholicism, and if anything's going to heal the Reformation, this disastrous diabolical split between, then it might be the capacity to become familiar again with the miraculous, with the supernatural, with a different dynamic between matter and spirit.
And I have also noticed in my speaking engagements that the younger my audience is, the more responsive it seems to be.
Right.
To whatever I say at that location. I get. Yeah, I've had a few kind of harumfish questions asked by older members of the audience. But in general, it's very gratifying because thus far I have not seen any reviews in scholarly journals. We'll see what happens when those begin to appear. But I'm very excited because I'm going to be giving a talk at the University of Chicago in October, where two of my respondents are historians of religion whose work I deeply, deeply admire, and they're going to be responding. So I can't wait to hear what they have to say.
That's wonderful. I daren't hope it would be live streamed, but I wish you well, and can't wait to hear. Professor Carlos, thank you so much for doing this. It's very kind of you. It's been such a joy and a real pleasure to meet you in person. So thank you for taking the time and trouble.
Oh, no, thank you for the interview and for inviting me to join you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you. I hope we can keep in touch.
Yes, please.